So today's the Ajahn Chah Memorial Day, January 16th, and for anybody who didn't happen to know that. So instead of the topic at hand on the fourth Satipatthana, 5 hindrances, which we've been doing, we're going to take just a day's break from that and do some readings around the idea, subject of Ajahn Chah, just to commemorate his life and his teachings and his dispensation for all of us. And then just to let people know too, as part of today, January 16th recollections, we'll be having a bit of a movie night at 6 o'clock, starting at 6 over in the main hall, and we'll show a couple of YouTube videos of Ajahn Chah. The first one being The Mindful Way, and the second one being The Buddha Comes to Sussex. So these are sort of classic. And there's not huge amounts of footage of Ajahn Chah, but enough to give a flavor, which is kind of why I wanted to do it, just so that people could see at least some video and hear some audio of Ajahn Chah, to get a flavor of his personality. And those two, I think, together combined take a little bit more than an hour, and then we'll see what time we have left for some meditation. Probably a bit truncated that evening, so starting at 6.
So maybe we could do tea at 5. Tea.
So I'm going to start. I was having a little trouble trying to figure out what readings to do from the collected teachings of Ajahn Chah, and also from his biography, Stillness Flowing, just because there's so much, and there's so many angles to his presence in the world, his teachings, the various Dhamma teachings to both lay and monastics, his whole mode of training monastic community, because that was his forte. I mean, all of it was his forte, obviously, but he's, to the monastics, he's so well known for his monastic training and his monastic style, and how to remember some of that as well. And then just his own personal struggles and his personal practice, and to try and fit that all into a half an hour of readings as well, it's completely impossible. So it's going to be a little bit higgledy-piggledy here, starting with a few small, short passages from Stillness Flowing, and then to do some readings from a couple of teachings in the collected teachings. And we'll just see where we get, just to try and get a little bit more of a flavor of Lumpur Cha. So this first small reading is on page 176 of Stillness Flowing, in the section called Sketches, and this particular one is called Inspiring. A number of the qualities that came to define Lumpur in the eyes of his disciples were virtues held in universal regard. Perhaps the most prominent of these was that of patience. Although some accomplishments are necessarily private, the extent of a forest monk's capacity to endure through physical discomfort and the rigors of monastic life can never be so. As the leader of a monastic community, Lumpur's patience was visible to all. He earned the particular devotion of the monks of Wat Pah Pong by leading them from the front, and by never asking them to do anything that he would not do himself. He also became renowned for his forbearance when dealing with the problems attendant on running a large monastery, listening to and advising on the difficulties and doubts of the monks and novices and mechis and lay supporters. When Lumpur spoke about patience, and he spoke about it often, his words carried great weight. Lumpur was also seen as a role model for the appropriate expression of gratitude, perhaps the virtue most central to Thai culture. In Thailand, a sense of gratitude is taken to be a key distinguishing mark of goodness. Accusations of, quote, ingratitude are experienced as serious and hurtful, even devastating. In fact, gratitude is a somewhat imprecise translation of the Thai katanyu katawedi, a term taken straight from the Pali, as the latter consists of 2 related virtues, Katanyu is the recognition of kindness as received, and Katavedi, the determination to appropriately express that recognition. Efforts to repay the debt of gratitude are given particular emphasis in Thailand, especially in the case of key benefactors, such as parents and teachers. Luang Por honored his parents in a manner fitting to a monastic. As a young monk, he postponed his studies in order to nurse his father on his deathbed. During his traveling years, he regularly visited his mother and gave her Dhamma teachings. When he established Wat Pa Pong, he arranged for her to come to live in the monastery and become a nun under his guidance and protection. Although Luang Por never practiced under the guidance of a teacher for any great length of time, the sense of gratitude he felt for those who had helped him on the path was tangible. He always spoke with the greatest reverence of Luang Pu Mun, his spiritual father, meeting whom had been the pivotal experience in his life. He also often spoke with great affection and respect of Luang Pu Tongrat and Luang Pu Kinari, the other two monks who had most strongly influenced him. Luang Pu Mun passed away in 1949, the year after Luang Por had visited him in Nong Pu, while Luang Por Tongrat died shortly after Luang Por's return to Ubon in 1956. Luang Por was thus denied the opportunity to express his gratitude to them. But Luang Pu Kinari lived on until 1980, and for many years prior to that, Luang Por sent a regular shift of monks from Wat Pa Pong to act as attendants and nurses, as the old monk refused to have anything to do with the medical profession. When Luang Pu Kinari died, Luang Por and his disciples organized the funeral and conducted all of the funeral rites. Luang Por endeared himself to the lay supporters of Wat Pa Pong by showing an unwavering appreciation for their support, never taking it for granted. On important occasions in the lives of his long-term supporters, Luang Por would accept invitations to receive alms in their houses. When they were ill, he would visit them and give them encouragement. And at the end of their lives, he would lead the Sangha in performing the funeral rites. He once said to the Sangha, "When I knew a certain amount about myself, I thought about the lay people. I saw the debt I owed to them everywhere, even people who'd only put one ladle of rice in my bowl. I wasn't heedless. I didn't forget. I thought of the kindness of every single person." He constantly reminded his disciples to recall how their life depended on the generosity of lay supporters. Giving food, lodging, and medicine in times of sickness, these aren't small matters. They're supporting our journey to Nibbana. If we had no food, we wouldn't be able to make it. We wouldn't be able to meditate. So on page 182, another short recollection of Luang Por's equanimity. For many years, Luang Por was the subject of criticism and slander from a small number of jealous monks in Ubon. At the height of the Vietnam War, he was denounced as a communist. One year it was even whispered about that a senior monk had gone so far as to hire a hitman. In the Thailand of that time, not such an outlandish assertion. Although Luang Por did not die, the monk supposedly behind the plot did, from rabies. Time passed, and Luang Por's resolute refusal to add fuel to the flames of conflict allowed this situation to cool. Luang Por, having handled unjustified abuse with equanimity, now faced a new challenge: fame and popularity. The Buddha was blunt on the dangers likely to beset a monk who becomes famous. From the Samyutta Nikaya, "A fatal thing are gains, favor, and fame, a bitter, harsh impediment to the attainment of the unsurpassed freedom from bondage." The temptation they provide The temptation they provide to pride and arrogance is strong. Another quote from the Samyutta. It is just like a beetle feeding on dung, gorged with dung, standing before a great dunghill, who might despise other beetles, saying, I am a dung eater, full of dung, gorged with dung, and before me is this great dunghill. If you've never seen Lumpur Pasana's imitation of a dung beetle, it's a must see if we can get him to do it sometimes. Standing up on his pile of dung. In the mobile, connected world of today, it is inevitable that an accomplished monk resident in a monastery for any length of time will, sooner or later, attract the attention of the laity. This was already true in the 1970s. During the Vietnam War, an ambitious program of road building was undertaken in Isan, primarily for military and national security reasons. One result was that it became much easier to visit forest monasteries. At a time of growing secularization and a widespread sense that the standard of the monastic order had never been so low, people started to look further afield for monks who were truly worthy of their respect. Lumpur's name began to be included on the list of inspiring monks worth visiting. A short biography of Lumpur, written in 1968 by his disciple Ajahn Chah, was another milestone. Local businessmen in the city, civil servants, and Army and Air Force officers posted in Ubon started to arrive in greater numbers. Soon, Lumpur was known to the lay Buddhists of Bangkok. Coachloads of merit makers started to arrive. This new state of affairs was impressed upon the monastery when two members of the King's Privy Council visited to ask questions on Dhamma practice. Sometime later, Lumpur was invited to receive alms in the royal palace. The publication of books of Lumpur's transcribed Dhamma talks, both in the Thai originals and in English translation, were initiated by his Western disciples in the late 1970s. Following Lumpur's admonition that the Dhamma should never be bought and sold, they were made available for free distribution. These books, followed by the first set of audio cassette tapes, spread Lumpur's name throughout Thailand, and the English translations gave him an international audience. Before long, his teachings were being translated into German, French, Spanish, Chinese, and other languages. Lumpur seemed as unmoved by this newfound fame and status as he was by abuse and slander. On the 5th of September, 1973, he received from King Bhumibol Adulyadej the monastic honor of Chao Kun, with the title Prat Bodhinyana Thera. On his return from Bangkok, a large crowd was waiting to greet him at Ubon railway station. A long procession of cars and trucks escorted him back to the monastery, where many hundreds of more people were waiting. Once there, a great merit-making ceremony took place to celebrate the honor conferred by the king on their teacher. Throughout it all, Lumpur remained a cool, still center at the heart of the excitement and joy. When the lay people formally invited him to give a Dhamma talk, he spoke of his feelings at receiving the title. He said the title of Chao Kun was a worldly convention. He was the same Lumpur that he had been a few days before. Worldly dhammas of gain and loss, fame and obscurity, pleasure and pain, praise and blame, are all fickle and changing. Knowing the nature of worldly dhammas, the mind is not moved by them. And then a quote from Ajahn Chah. The bridge over the river Moon always remains the same. It doesn't arch up if the waters rise. It doesn't sag if the waters fall. There's also a story, if I hopefully remember it correctly, that when before he received the title of Chao Kun, when it was offered to him, they asked him to submit some sort of biographical statement, some biographical reference, of his life and his accomplishments and things like that. And he just didn't do it for days and days and days, and they kept on asking him. And finally, under pressure, he gave a very short little snippet of something like, sometimes there is rain without thunder and lightning, sometimes there is thunder and lightning without rain. Please excuse me if I've misquoted that, but something like that, which is a statement from the Buddha essentially saying, not to, or that sometimes people who are all puffed up and given honors are just really putting out a lot of thunder and lightning, but there's no substance, there's no rain that's coming from it. So it was kind of his very, very indirect comment on the statement of receiving honors and who receives them and the qualities of those people. I don't know if the powers that be actually picked up on that or not, but that was his biographical statement. So I'll do a few readings from the Collected Teachings of Ajahn Chah, Volume 2, Talks on Formal Practice. Get some little hints of his teaching. This first one is on page 111 of this Volume 2, Talks on Formal Practice, Chapter 13, called The Place of Coolness. The practice of Dhamma goes against our habits. The truth goes against our desires. So there is difficulty in the practice. Some things which we understand as wrong may be right, while the things we take to be right may be wrong. Why is this? Because our minds are in darkness, we don't clearly see the truth. We don't really know anything, and so are fooled by people's lies. They point out what is right as being wrong, and we believe it. That which is wrong, they say is right, and we believe that. This is because we are not yet our own masters. Our moods lie to us constantly. We shouldn't take this mind and its opinions as our guide, because it doesn't know the truth. Some people don't want to listen to others at all, but this is not the way of a man of wisdom. A wise man listens to everything. One who listens to Dhamma must listen just the same, whether he likes it or not, and not blindly believe or disbelieve. He must stay at the halfway mark, the middle point, and not be heedless. He just listens and then contemplates, giving rise to the right results accordingly. A wise man should contemplate and see the cause and effect for himself, and before he believes what he hears. Even if the teacher speaks the truth, don't just believe it, because you don't yet know the truth of it for yourself. It's the same for all of us, including myself. I've practiced longer than you. I've seen many lies before. For instance, quote, "This practice is really difficult, really hard," unquote. Why is the practice difficult? It's just because we think wrongly. We have wrong view. Previously, I lived together with other monks, but it didn't feel right. I ran away to the forests and mountains, fleeing the crowd, the monks and novices. I thought that they weren't like me. They didn't practice as hard as I did. They were sloppy. That person was like this person was like that. This was something that really put me in turmoil. It was the cause for my continually running away. But whether I lived alone or with others, I still had no peace. On my own, I wasn't content. In a large group, I wasn't content. I thought this discontent was due to my companions, due to my moods, due to my living place, the food, the weather, due to this and that. I was constantly searching for something to suit my mind. As a Dhutanga monk, I went traveling, but things still weren't right. So I contemplated, what can I do to make things right? What can I do? Living with a lot of people, I was dissatisfied. With few people, I was dissatisfied. For what reason? I just couldn't see it. Why was I dissatisfied? Because I had wrong view, just that. Because I still clung to the wrong Dhamma. Wherever I went, I was discontent, thinking, Here is no good, there is no good, on and on like that. I blamed others, I blamed the weather, heat and cold, I blamed everything. Just like a mad dog, it bites whatever it meets because it's mad. When the mind is like this, our practice is never settled. Today we feel good, tomorrow no good. It's like that all the time. We don't attain contentment or peace. The Buddha once saw a jackal, a wild dog, run out of the forest where he was staying. It stood still for a while, then it ran into the underbrush, and then out again. Then it ran into a tree hollow, then out again. Then it went into a cave, only to run out again. 1 minute it stood, the next it ran, then it lay down, then it jumped up. That jackal had mange. When it stood, the mange would eat into his skin, so it would run. Running, it was still uncomfortable, so it would stop. Standing was still uncomfortable, so it would lie down. Then it would jump up again, running into the underbrush, the tree hollow, never staying still. The Buddha said, "Monks, did you see that jackal this afternoon? Standing it suffered, running it suffered, sitting it suffered, lying down it suffered. In the underbrush, a tree hollow, or a cave, it suffered. It blamed standing for its discomfort. It blamed sitting. It blamed running and lying down. It blamed the tree, the underbrush, and the cave. In fact, the problem was with none of those things. That jackal had mange. The problem was with the mange." We monks are just the same as that jackal. Our discontent is due to wrong view. Because we don't exercise sense restraint, we blame our suffering on externals. Whether we live at Wat Pah Pong, in America, or in London, we aren't satisfied. Going to live at Bung Wai or any of the other branch monasteries, we're still not satisfied. Why not? Because we still have wrong view within us. Wherever we go, we aren't content. But just like that dog, if the mange is cured, it is content wherever it goes. So it is for us. I reflect on this often, and I teach you this often because it's very important. If we know the truth of our various moods, we arrive at contentment. Whether it's hot or cold, we are satisfied. Living with many people or with few people, we are satisfied. Contentment doesn't depend on how many people we are with. It comes only from right view. If we have right view, then wherever we stay, we are content. But most of us have wrong view. It's just like a maggot. A maggot's living place is filthy. Its food is filthy. But they suit the maggot. If you take a stick and brush it away from its lump of dung, it'll struggle to crawl back in. It's the same way when the Ajahn teaches us to see rightly. We resist, it makes us feel uneasy. We run back to our lump of dung because that's where we feel at home. We're all like this. If we don't see the harmful consequences of all of our wrong views, then we can't leave them. The practice is difficult. So we should listen. There's nothing else to the practice. If we have right view, wherever we go, we are content. I have practiced and seen this already. These days there are many monks, novices and lay people coming to see me. If I still didn't know, if I still had wrong view, I'd be dead by now. The right abiding place for monks, the place of coolness, is just right view itself. We shouldn't look for anything else. So even though you may be unhappy, it doesn't matter. That unhappiness is uncertain. Is that unhappiness yourself? Is there any substance to it? Is it real? I don't see it as being real at all. Unhappiness is merely a flash of feeling which appears and then is gone. Happiness is the same. Is there a consistency to happiness? Is it truly an entity? It's simply a feeling that flashes suddenly and is gone. There, it's born and then it dies. Love just flashes up for a moment and then disappears. Where is the consistency in love or hate or resentment? In truth, there is no substantial entity there. They are merely impressions which flare up in the mind and then die. They deceive us constantly. We find no certainty anywhere. Just as the Buddha said, when unhappiness arises, it stays for a while, then disappears. When unhappiness disappears, happiness arises, and lingers for a while, and then dies. When happiness disappears, unhappiness arises again. On and on like this. In the end, we can say only this: apart from the birth, the life, and the death of suffering, there is nothing. There is just this. But we who are ignorant run and grab it constantly. We never see the truth of it, that there's simply this continual change. If we understand this, then we don't need to think very much, but we have much wisdom. If we don't know it, then we will have more thinking than wisdom, and maybe no wisdom at all. It's not until we truly see the harmful results of our actions that we can give them up. Likewise, it's not until we see the real benefits of practice that we can follow it and begin working to make the mind good. If we cut a log of wood and throw it into the river, and that log doesn't sink or rot, or run aground on either of the banks of the river, that log will definitely reach the sea. Our practice is comparable to this. If you practice according to the path laid down by the Buddha, following it straight, you will transcend two things. What two things? Just those two extremes that the Buddha said were not part of the path of a true meditator. Indulgence in pleasure and indulgence in pain. These are the two banks of the river. One of the banks of that river is hate, the other is love. Or you can say that one bank is happiness, the other unhappiness. The log is this mind. As it floats down the river, it will experience happiness and unhappiness. If the mind doesn't cling to that happiness or unhappiness, it will reach the ocean of Nibbana. You should see that there's nothing other than happiness and happiness arising and disappearing. If you don't run aground on these things, then you are on the path of a true meditator. This is the teaching of the Buddha. Happiness, unhappiness, love and hate are simply established in nature according to the constant law of nature. The wise person doesn't follow or encourage them. He doesn't cling to them. This is the mind which lets go of indulgence in pleasure and indulgence in pain. It is the right practice. Just as that log of wood will eventually flow to the sea, so will the mind, which doesn't attach to these two extremes, inevitably attain peace. The last selection here is from the same volume, chapter 18, Towards the Unconditioned. It's quite a long talk, so I'm just going to read a few excerpts from it, starting on page 1. The chapter starts on page 173, and the first selection here is on page 175. The practice of Dhamma is for leading the mind to the transcendence of suffering. The body can't transcend suffering. Having been born, it must experience pain and sickness, aging and death. Only the mind can transcend clinging and grasping. All the teachings of the Buddha, which we call pariyatti, are a skillful means to this end. For instance, the Buddha talked about upadinaka sankhara and anupadinaka sankhara, mind-attended conditions and non-mind-attended conditions. Non-mind-attended conditions are usually defined as such things as trees, mountains, rivers, and so on, inanimate things. Mind-attended conditions are defined as animate things, animals, human beings, and so on. Most students of Dhamma take this definition for granted, but if you consider the matter deeply, how the human mind gets so caught up in sights, sounds, tastes, smells, feelings, and mental states, you might see that really there isn't anything which is not mind-attended. As long as there is craving in this mind, everything becomes mind-attended. Studying the Dhamma without practicing it, we will be unaware of its deeper meanings. For instance, we might think that the pillars of this meeting hall, the tables, benches, and all inanimate things are not mind-attended. We only look at one side of things. But just try getting a hammer and smashing some of these things and you'll see whether they're mind-attended or not. It's our own mind, clinging to the tables, chairs, and all of our possessions, which attends these things. Even when one little cup breaks, it hurts, because our mind is attending that cup. Whatever we feel to be ours, trees, mountains, or whatever, have a mind attending them. If not their own, then someone else's. These are all mind-attended conditions, not non-mind-attended. It's the same for our body. Normally we would say that the body is mind-attended. The mind, which attends the body, is none other than upadana, latching onto the body and clinging to it as being me and mine. Just as a blind man cannot conceive of colors, no matter where he looks, no colors can be seen, just so for the mind blocked by craving and delusion, all objects of consciousness become mind-attended. For the mind tainted with craving and obstructed by delusion, everything becomes mind-attended, tables, chairs, animals, and everything else. If we understand that there is an intrinsic self, we think that there is an intrinsic self, the mind attaches to everything. All of nature becomes mind-attended. There is always thinking and attachment. The Buddha talked about sankata dhammas and asankata dhammas, conditioned and unconditioned things. Conditioned things are innumerable, material or immaterial, big or small. If our mind is under the influence of delusion, it will proliferate about these things, dividing them up into good and bad, short and long, coarse and refined. Why does the mind proliferate like this? Because it doesn't know determined reality, sammuti satcha. It doesn't see the Dhamma. Not seeing the Dhamma, the mind is full of clinging. As long as the mind is held down by clinging, there can be no escape. There is confusion, birth, old age, sickness, and death, even in the thinking processes. This kind of mind is called the sankata dhamma, conditioned mind. Asankata dhamma, the unconditioned, refers to the mind which has seen Dhamma, the truth, of the five khandhas as they are, as transient, imperfect, and ownerless. All ideas of me and them, mine and theirs, belong to the determined reality. Really, they are all conditions. When we know the truth of conditions as neither ourselves nor belonging to us, we let go of conditions and the determined. When we let go of conditions, we attain the Dhamma. We enter into and realize the Dhamma. When we attain the Dhamma, we know clearly. What do we know? We know that there are only conditions and determinations, no being, no self, no us, nor them. This is knowledge of the way things are. Seeing in this way transcends things. The body may grow old, get sick, and die, but the mind transcends this state. When the mind transcends conditions, it knows the unconditioned. The mind becomes the unconditioned, the state which no longer contains conditioning factors. The mind is no longer conditioned by the concerns of the world. Conditions no longer contaminate the mind. Pleasure and pain no longer affect it. Nothing can affect the mind or change it. The mind is assured it has escaped all constructions. Seeing the true nature of conditions and the determined, the mind becomes free. This freed mind is called the unconditioned, that which is beyond the power of constructing influences. If the mind doesn't really know conditions and determinations, it is moved by them. Encountering good, bad, pleasure, or pain, it proliferates about them. Why does it proliferate? Because there is still a cause. What is the cause? The cause is the understanding that the body is oneself or belongs to the self, that feelings are self or belonging to self, that perception is self or belonging to self, that conceptual thought is self or belonging to self, that consciousness is self or belonging to self. The tendency to conceive things in terms of self is the source of happiness, suffering, birth, old age, sickness, and death. This is the worldly mind, spinning around and changing at the directives of worldly conditions. This is the conditioned mind. In the time of our forefathers, when a person died, they would invite the monks to go and recite the recollections on impermanence. Anicca vata sankhara. Impermanent are all conditioned things. Upadavaya dhammino. Of the nature to arise and pass away. Upajitva nirujjanti. Having been born, they all must perish. Te sangwu pasamo sukho. The cessation of conditions is true happiness. All conditions are impermanent. The body and mind are both impermanent. They are impermanent because they do not remain fixed and unchanging. All things that are born must necessarily change. They are transient, especially our body. What is there that doesn't change with this body? Are hair, nails, teeth, skin still the same as they used to be? The condition of the body is constantly changing, so it is impermanent. Is the body stable? Is the mind stable? Think about it. How many times is there arising and ceasing even in one day? Both body and mind are constantly arising and ceasing. Conditions are in a state of constant turmoil. In the last section, appearances are determined into existence. Why must we determine them? Because they don't intrinsically exist. For example, suppose somebody wanted to make a marker. He would take a piece of wood or a rock and place it on the ground and then call it a marker. Actually, it's not a marker. There isn't any marker. That's why you must determine it into existence. In the same way, we determine cities, people, cattle, everything. Why must we determine these things? Because originally they do not exist. Concepts such as monk and layperson are also determinations. We determine these things into existence because intrinsically they aren't here. It's like having an empty dish. You can put anything you like into it. You can put anything you like into it because it's empty. This is the nature of determined reality. Men and women are simply determined concepts, as are all the things around us. If we know the truth of determinations clearly, we will know that there are no beings, because beings are determined things. Understanding that these things are simply determinations, you can be at peace. But if you believe that the person, being, the mind, the theirs, and so on are intrinsic qualities, then you must laugh and cry over them. These are the proliferations of conditioning factors. If we take such things to be ours, there will always be suffering. This is micchaditthi, wrong view. Names are not intrinsic realities, they are provisional truths. Only after we are born do we obtain names, isn't that so? Or did you already have your name when you were born? The name usually comes afterwards, right? Why must we determine these names? Because intrinsically they aren't there. We should clearly know these determinations. Good, evil, high, low, black and white are all determinations. We are all lost in determinations. This is why at the funeral ceremonies the monks chant, Anicca vata sankhara, conditions are impermanent, they arise and pass away. That's the truth. What is there that, having arisen, doesn't cease? Good moods arise and then cease. Have you ever seen anybody cry for 3 or 4 years? At the most, you may see people crying a whole night, and then the tears dry up. Having arisen, they cease. Te sangwu pasamo sukho. If we understand sankharas, proliferations, and thereby subdue them, this is the greatest happiness. To be calmed of proliferations, calmed of being, calmed of individuality, of the burden of self, is true merit. Transcending these things, one sees the unconditioned. This means that no matter what happens, the mind doesn't proliferate around it. There's nothing that can throw the mind off its natural balance. What else could you want? This is the end, the finish. And just a few snippets of Ajahn Chah. Thoughts or comments, questions? Hi.
Well, I'm so grateful for his life. And hopefully he'll come back and spread some more Dhamma.
Well, I hope he finished his work. I think he did. From what everybody says, it was pretty clear he's done his duty.
So maybe he won't be reborn.
Not according to traditional teachings. He's made his contribution, but I guess if you consider some of the more later schools of Buddhism, perhaps in some way he can make his teachings known. But I would say that he's still alive for us. Still exists in a way for us in a very skillful way through his teachings, his dispensation, and the fact that his worldwide community, it's a point that Ajahn Chah makes in Stillness Flowing at one point, it's sort of like this is a true testimony to his the power of his presence and the power of his teachings. That his community didn't die when he died, didn't fade away. In fact, it continued to increase in numbers as it slowly increased in numbers, even a number of years after his death. So he's still alive in that way.
Ajahn, how would you attribute that expansion of Ajahn Chah's community compared to other really revered teachers where the communities tend to kind of dissipate? Is my understanding after they died, it seems to have the opposite. What's your understanding of kind of the engine behind that?
Boy, I wish Lumpur Pasana was here to answer that question, but I don't know if there's any one single factor. I mean, of course, it's just probably a member of the Thai Sangha would say something like, it's just the result of his incredible merit. The power of his realization and the effectiveness of his teaching is the force of energy anyway behind the fact that it just it's just such a strong force of momentum because it was so powerful. He also had a very more unique ability to speak to a wide variety of people. He wasn't just a monk's monk or a layperson's monk or a charismatic teacher to a limited audience. He was so well realized and well practiced, and he was charismatic, but in a very genuine kind of a way. His influence just reached so many different people in walks of life, in different walks of life. And the Sangha, I think, probably the way he structured the monastic community. It's not everybody's cup of tea. In fact, Ajahn Chah's style of community development is fairly unique. There are other, bits and pieces of communities from the Thai tradition and other traditions that, really emphasize a unified and harmonious community. But Ajahn Chah was relentless with that. That was his style. That was what he wanted to establish. People living together, working through their issues together. And he placed a strong emphasis on practicing with community and training with community with strict training standards that, didn't always suit individual needs, so that people with strong individual inclinations or who just couldn't hack it, in this kind of environment, would wander off. But the consistency and his ability to, as was said in the very first reading, to kind of walk the talk. He didn't ask the community to do anything that he wouldn't do himself, just basically his own realization that it's more comfortable if I can follow my own desires and go off and be by myself, but he wasn't happy in those situations either. And I think he just realized the power of working with the Sangha, following the Vinaya very closely, following a strong set of monastery observances, conformance as a way of self-effacement, whittling down the edges of me and mine in a very practical way. And that leaves a community of people who are just doing their best to try and realize the teachings and practice together, at the same time supporting each other. And, that's attractive to people who want to realize an end to suffering and realize that they really can't do it on their own, which is probably true for the most of us. So the style of community, in addition to the, strength of his teaching style, but the style of community that he established, I think, is a model that is still lasting. Probably over time will deteriorate as time goes on, but it has a pretty strong force of momentum up until, including these days and times. Any thoughts? Do you have
There is this one thing that is a tendency amongst leaders, and I'm not sure if you could say it's just in each monastery, each abbot, but I think Ajahn Chah at least stepped outside us a little bit in the Thai tradition, and surely in the Western monasteries this is because egalitarianism is something that's encouraged, is that there tends to be sometimes leaders who just essentially suck in the power, not able to kind of think of a better metaphor. So they're the ones who give the Dhamma talks, they're the ones who answer all the questions, they're the ones who make all the decisions. There's just no going outside of that. And so the monks get to kind of be who live with them can kind of pay attention to their own practice, but they don't necessarily understand leadership or how to step up into responsibility or do certain things without the main teacher or abbot making all the decisions. And so then when that abbot dies or becomes incapacitated, the whole community falls apart because they don't know how to really, it's very, very difficult for them to learn how to actually take care of themselves because they haven't learned that skill. And so that's one thing that has come up, I think, with a lot of the monasteries, and especially the Western monasteries, that they tend to really push out more of the authority and power. There's not this kind of vacuum where it's just contained amongst one person. And so when a senior person like that, who's imbibed that kind of leadership style, steps down or passes away, then people can easily rise up, and so you don't have the dissolution of the community based on that. And I mean, that's not only a monastic quality, it happens in other institutions. But I think I see that more, especially at Abhayagiri, even the leadership change over the years from Ajahn Karunadhammo, and then just Pasno, and then Ajahn Karunadhammo, and Ajahn Yaniko. There's always bumps along the way, but the community just keeps thriving because there is that sense of people being responsible and others learning how to teach and learning how to take care of all kinds of things in the monastery. So I think Ajahn Chah also encouraged that in all the branch monasteries that he set up, and he did have he didn't establish himself as like a supreme leader or create that kind of vacuum, as far as I know.
Even though he was individually so charismatic and the pillar and the central grounding. One other thing that Lumpur Pasano has often pointed out is that Ajahn Chah, in a state of pretty much non-functional life, kind of probably willed himself to some extent to stay alive for 10 years as a presence, but not as a formative presence, so that people essentially had to get used to him not being the central, pillar, and having to come together, work together, be together to make decisions to run the monasteries, but with still Lumpur's kind of presence there, so that it couldn't deteriorate. Nobody would dare do anything kind of a little bit, challenging to the very successful form with Lumpur still alive, so that he was essentially willing to give himself to 10 years of being in a more or less vegetative state to help the Sangha find its way keep together. Okay, it's time to take a break and get ready for the meal.